Let me do two more and then I'll pause to see if you have any questions. Model 4 is a model that already exists at St. Michael's and other places too, and that is of pastoral administrators. So Canon 517.2 in the Code of Canon Law authorizes a bishop to appoint a deacon, religious, layperson to be the leader of the community, and when that happens, to also appoint a priest as the sacramental minister for the parish. There's lots more to that. I think there's 17 pastoral administrators around the Diocese of Saginaw right now. So that's a fourth option for you to consider. And a fifth option that is working quite well in different parts of the country on a limited basis is also in canon law, and that's what's called an in solidum team. That's a team of 3 or 4 priests who are assigned by the bishop to minister to 3 or 4 parishes. And in that process, one of them, as it says there, is called the moderator of the team, is the leader of that team, again, appointed by the bishop. And then they have deacons, lay people, sisters who work with the team. But that's a different way of serving parishes. I was working in the Diocese of Madison in Wisconsin, where they had, there's about 30 cohorts there, and 2 of the 30 suggestions came out for this team concept because they saw particular advantages given their geography and whatever to have several priests ministering among them. And the pastors were cooperative, they liked the idea, and they used that. So just briefly in review, the 5 models, not in any order of priority, but linked parishes, 2 or more parishes, standalone. In this diocese, there's some with 3 or even 4 parishes right now. Partnership parishes, substantive dynamics, merged parishes, pastoral administrators, in solidum team. So that's a lot just to take on. We're going to get even more specific in a moment, but let me just pause for a moment and see if there's any questions that would help you kind of think about this part so far. Good, we're going pretty good on time. Any questions for you right now? Is this making some sense at least? Okay, then let's go on to see if we can make some more sense. So now if you join me in the first section, so the foundational section, and I'd like you to join me right after the goals and the planning commission on page 3 in the first section is called assumptions. So I'd like to do this part before getting into the actual 8 steps of the process and the evaluation forms and all, because this is what is kind of behind the whole process. So if you're on page 3 with me in terms of assumptions, there's a total of 13 of them. I'm not going to highlight all 13 now for the sake of time. I can see, yes, first section, page 3. Okay. So the first one is about something we all know in our faith, which is the Paschal Mystery. The Paschal Mystery is about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And this assumption says the Paschal Mystery is central both to our faith, but also to this planning process. And the way I think of that from your perspective is, what you're being asked to do is to think about the life of your parishes, what you're really proud of, what you love about your parishes, why you are so committed to them. Also to think about what's dying in your parishes, or where are the struggles in your parishes. What are the things that maybe cause you to stay awake at night worrying about sometimes? And where's new life possible for the people in your parish? So when the bishop says prayer is at the heart of this process, part of what he means is that we're engaged in a faith activity here to look at the life, death, and resurrection of each of the parishes and to say, how can we be stronger as a network of parishes going forward? Or as a priest on the Diocesan Planning Commission during the Monday night meeting said, you know, what I'm aware of is that we are living as Catholics today with decisions that were made in the 19th and early 20th century about where parishes should be and why they should be there. We live in the 21st century. We ought to be able to take 21st century thinking to say what's going to best position us to be strong, a strong church into the future. So the Paschal Mystery is one of those assumptions. I'd like to go then for a sec to number 7, because it's about you. Strong leadership by clergy, religious, and laity is needed for planning to succeed. This is not a magic process. This depends, as the bishop says in his letter, on your help, on your good thinking, on your willing to disagree with each other, on your willing to talk with each other about what makes sense to have the Catholic Church be as strong as possible in this part of the diocese. So leadership by priests and deacons, by religious, by laity. One of the things I believe about a process like this is that you folks will influence the parking lot conversations, if you will, in your parishes. If you say, this process isn't worth it, don't get involved, people will listen and they won't get involved. If you say, now is the time for our voice to be heard, what do we think about our church? What do we think about being Catholics? How can we grow stronger as a church? People are going to listen, and they're more likely to get involved. So your leadership makes a difference, but I want to go back to that point I made at the very beginning. Your job is not to do all the work. Your job is to see that all the work gets done and get lots of help. And in a few minutes, I'm going to suggest 5 different ways you can do that. So I don't want to just talk in the sky, but talk very practically. Let me just do a couple more that I think are really important. Number 8, all parishes will be more effective if they plan for the future. The way the bishop said it the other night was, if we do nothing, the future will plan for us. If we think about it and plan the future, we have a chance to help create that future. So you're doing this planning is not just a service to your parish, it's really a service to the whole church in this wonderful diocese. Number 9, parishes will be stronger and more effective if they work together. So you're going to be invited to work with some neighboring parishes in this process. I hope that can be a really enriching experience to meet new people who are Catholics themselves, who want to build the church themselves. I mean, all of you wouldn't be here tonight if you weren't already very committed to your parishes and to this area. In this process, you're going to have a chance to meet other Catholics and to work together with them. And I want to just go to number 11 for a second in that spirit of honesty. If and when parish mergers are needed, they will be less traumatic and more natural if people in parishes have already been in relationship with one another. In the future, some mergers might even be suggested by parish partners. Let me just give you one example of that, because merger sometimes is almost like the elephant in the room if not to talk about. So I had the privilege of working in another diocese, and the bishop had said in the beginning, there's this one town where there's 6 Catholic churches, and it's in about a mile area. And I would love it if we could ever just have 3 parishes in there. We don't need 6 churches there, but I understand there's a history to them. They were originally, the Polish people here, and the Italian, and the Irish, and the German, and so on. You know that experience. Okay, anyway, I happened to be working in that community, and I happened to be part of one of their cohort meetings. And they had this wonderful, I was going to say debate, a discussion, let's say, about, well, we really can't stay as 6 because that's not good stewardship, and there's a lot of duplication here. But what if we were 2 or 3? And they had this interesting conversation back and forth. And then somebody said, but what if we became 1? What if in this town there was 1 Catholic church? And that 1 Catholic church drew on the gifts and the strengths and the capacities and said, no, we could never become 1. We used to fight against you in CYO or, and all those kinds of conversations. And in the end, their suggestion was to become 1. The bishop's jaw was rolling on the floor someplace when he heard that. But the point is that it came from the people, because as the people studied and thought about what's going to make the strongest church and presence in this area, that was their suggestion. So it may or may not be yours, but it's one worth considering, one of those options. So these assumptions, I invite you when you sit down in your own parish to follow up this meeting, to look at those again and study them and see how they have an impact. Now, one last thing in this first segment, if you turn the page one more time to page 4, and I think this is really important as a point of integrity. If I was sitting in your chairs right now, I'd want to know real clearly, well, how are we going to be evaluated? I mean, I'm saying to you, you're going to do a parish self-evaluation. What are you being asked to evaluate on? And so the next piece here, let's do it first in the book, because you can see them all together. There's 4 areas of parish life you're going to be asked to evaluate. You're going to be asked to study your parish and offer your best thinking. So you can see in bold the sacramental life of the parish, the areas of evangelization, catechesis, Catholic schools, and lifelong religious education, stewardship and justice, the service dimension of church, and effective administration or leadership. So let's just look at those briefly, one at a time. So the sacramental life of your parish, there are 4 criteria offered to you in this framework on the page and on the screen. That the Eucharist is the source and summit of the life and mission of the parish. How do you celebrate Eucharist? How engaged are the people in that process? You'll be asked to look at that. Sacramental celebrations and devotional practices. How well do they reflect the cultural heritage of the people who are gathering? Excuse me? Well, the Vatican could use some help in that. We're all in a growth spurt here. But that issue of how do you honor the people who are celebrating? I mean, one of the issues that came up today, for example, actually it surfaced last night in the meeting, these materials are all going to be translated into Spanish so that people from other cultures and other language groups have this information more accessible, can participate more fully in the process. So when you look at the area of sacramental life, how well does it reflect the heritage of the folks who are coming? How well trained are people for sacramental ministries? And how is music seen as an integral part of worship? In that second area, which is really about formation, lifelong formation, how is evangelization experienced by you? How is the parish providing lifelong faith formation? What about support for Catholic schools at the elementary and the high school levels? I know that not every area of the diocese has Catholic schools, but how are you in your own area supporting the existence of Catholic schools, supporting lifelong faith formation? And what about formation and education and vocational awareness? So that's the second area of study. The third area, the service area, is about stewardship and justice. So how well are you helping people be formed in an understanding of stewardship? The bishops wrote a pastoral in 1992 called Stewardship, a Disciple's Response, in which they say many really wonderful things, but one of them is stewardship's the responsibility of all of us. It's the way that disciples of Jesus live in the world today. Social justice, advocacy, and outreach, being good stewards of all God's gifts. There's a whole area there. And then finally, effective administration. The first is about leadership. The pastor or pastoral administrator staff, councils, exert effective leadership. How well is leadership being expressed? Our parish has that perennial problem sometimes in Seattle of too few people are asked to do too much of the work. How do we get more people engaged? I'm sure that doesn't happen in the Diocese of Saginaw, but I know it happens with us. So what do you think about leadership, and how can you get more people actively involved? Number 13, the parish is financially stable and exercises good stewardship. So you're being given all this financial data and asked to verify it so you can look at where are we as a parish financially and how can we work. Makes me think of another parish in a different diocese that I was working in. There was 2 parishes in a cohort there, and they reached 3 areas of agreement that were pretty evident to them. They agreed that merger was the best option for them. because they agreed they could no longer support themselves financially, independently. They also agreed that the two schools they had could no longer make it individually, but they could make it together. And they agreed that they were the natural merger partners. There wasn't like a third or a fourth partner. So they had agreement on that, partly because of studying the financial realities and so on. And then they passionately disagreed on a fourth area, which was which site the new parish should be. And that was its own story that maybe I'll tell another time. But so that idea of financial stability is important. Number 14, in its planning, the parish takes into account the diminished number of priests. Let me just skip ahead for a moment. This is not in your books, because we were just given this information, but I want to move ahead for a moment to some statistics right here. So let's stop here. So think about this as a 7-year period. It's probably better said December 31, 2003 to 7 years later, December 31, 2010. So not surprisingly, the square miles in the diocese hasn't changed, but the population from 724,000 to 700,000. The Catholic population from 139,000 to 108,000. The number of diocesan priests decreased from 102 to 90, and religious priests from 11 to 7. Now a second screen. So 100 diocesan priests, 11 religious order priests, 7 priests from other dioceses, total of 118, 7 years previous. Then if we talk about the active, 55, 7, and 5, that's 67 priests. So from 118 to 67 priests in a 7-year period. And the 32 retired priests do continue, many of them do continue to serve, but not in full-time pastoral leadership. So if you think of that last line there, the Catholics per priest. If you and I were meeting in December of 2003, we'd say about 1,100 Catholics per priest. The number right now is 1,620, or I should say last December, 1,621. And we were talking with the bishop today about having, by the time I come back in March, the number projected for December 31, 2017. And I'll just say, without getting into the specific numbers, they were pretty chilling in terms of the lesser number of priests. Because the bishop could say, well, actually, I know right now priests down the road who are intending to retire. We know how many seminarians we have in training. So this is just one of the realities that you're asked to think about, you know, given the number of priests, then given the geography, etc. So we can come back to that if you have questions about it, but let me just end this part. Let's see. Yeah, we did, so that's the number of priests. And then the next one is about geographic proximity to other parishes. And then finally, what about compensation for staff? So these are listed here as criteria for you to be able to consider as you do your work. And in fact, when I describe to you in a few minutes the evaluation form, we're actually going to give you 3 choices about what forms you want to use. It's these criteria that are at the heart of the evaluations. So if I was sitting to you and I'd say, okay, what do I want to study most importantly, it'd be the assumptions behind the process and then the criteria, because that's going to be the focus of your work. Okay, let me do, I think the very next thing is to try and pull some of this, well, it has questions. Let me do one more thing and then I'll take your questions. So now if you go to one more page in this book, it's page 5, I want to try and pull what I've said together into one process. And then I want to talk about the time frame of that and then see what questions you have. So you're here as parish core team members to provide leadership in this process. And I'll do this for the 3rd time. You're not here to do all the work, but you're here to see all the work is done.